The story of Afghanistan is in so many ways a very tragic one. It is a nation that has suffered invasion, external pressure and internal upheaval since before the time of Alexander the Great. Its people have endured more than their share of hardships. In fact, for many Afghans, all that has changed in the last 1,000 years are the weapons which have been used against so many of them. And among all the people that make up the Afghan nation, probably no other ethnic group has been subjected to the discrimination and violence suffered by the Shia Hazara community. They have been deprived of their traditional lands, they've been massacred, sold as slaves, and been denied access to the same services and opportunities available to the majority of the population. There is much about the history of Afghanistan, and in particular the history and identity of the Hazara, that remains unrevealed and unknown to this day. This is the story of their journey across the centuries. Historically, Afghanistan has been the link between Central Asia, the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent. And so it's a nation made up of many different ethnic groups, the result of innumerable invasions and migrations. Within its current borders, there are at least a dozen major ethnic groups, including Turkmen, Hazara, Pashtun, Tajik and Uzbek. The Pashtun nationality has always been the most dominant, and the royal families of the country were always Pashtun. Today, they represent about 50% of the total population. Islam was brought to Afghanistan during the 8th and 9th centuries by the Arabs. Prior to that, the nation had been ruled by various Persian, Greek and Central Asian empires. Following a subsequent breakdown in Arab rule, semi-independent states began to form. The Mongolian invasions of the 13th century came as massive black clouds driven by divine winds over a desolate landscape. Local dynasties and states were overwhelmed and crushed by the mighty armies led by the legendary Genghis Khan and his successors. These ruthless conquerors were to remain in control of part or all of the country until the 1500s, despite much resistance and internal strife. Following the collapse of Mongol rule, Afghanistan found itself in a situation much like today, caught in the grip of great powers. Armies marched to and fro, devastating the land and murdering the people, laying siege to city after city and destroying whatever had been left by the invading armies. It was not until 1747 that Afghanistan was able to free itself. This was the year that Nadir Shah, an empire builder from Persia, died and left a vacuum in Central Asia. Ahmed Shah, a former Afghan bodyguard, took up his post. Ahmed Shah was a Pashtun, and his Pashtun clan was to rule Afghanistan in one form or another for the next 200 years. Ahmed Shah was able to unify the different Afghan tribes and went on to conquer considerable parts of what are today eastern Iran, Pakistan, northern India and Uzbekistan. His successors, though, proved unable to hold his vast empire together, and within 50 years much of it had been seized by rival regional powers. Within the country there were numerous bloody civil wars for the throne, and for many Afghans it meant little that their lives were now being uprooted and destroyed by their own people as opposed to foreign invaders. At the beginning of the 19th century, Afghanistan's internal affairs became dramatically aggravated by the increasing intervention of two new foreign powers, the British Empire and Tsarist Russia. These two great powers were engaged in a race for Afghanistan. Their seizures of land, the overthrow of indigenous nations, and their reckless interference in the affairs of the remaining independent states in the region became known as the Great Game. For Afghans, the consequences were devastating. The arrival of European imperialism into the region simply accelerated and made more deadly the wars, poverty and destruction that had already racked the region. The Pashtun kings reigned over the country until 1973, when a republic was declared. But this new political regime also failed to meet the fundamental needs and aspirations of the people. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 marked the beginning of 25 years of suffering and continual strife that transformed the country into a desolate land once again. The rich cultural heritage of this country also began to disappear gradually, as did the Afghan people's hopes of recovering some sort of life, a decent income and a reasonably secure existence. These are the mountainous central highlands of Afghanistan, the Hazara Jat, or the land of the Hazara. And just like these imposing landscapes, the history of the Hazara people is shrouded in mystery. The Hazara's gentle Mongolian features set them apart from other Afghans. They speak an archaic form of Persian, with words borrowed from Mongol and Turkish. According to popular belief, the Hazara are descendants of the Mongol hordes that invaded this region in the 13th century. It's thought that when Genghis Khan retreated from the lands of the ancient Bactria, he left behind 1,000 of his men in the mountains of the Hazara Jat. These people later came to be known as Hazara, in reference to the Persian word Hezar, which means 1,000. But there has been much debate in academic circles about this legend.
تا آنجا که تاریخ رو میته هزارها دست کم پیش از 2000 سال بیتره، شاید 2500 سال بیتره دمیجا سکناگزین بودن و به اندازه هر قوم دیگه و هر ملیت دیگه حق دارن و میتونن سوابق خدا نشان بدن و مدعیشان که به هر حال از ساکنان اصلی این سرزمین هستن. اما این که از کجا آمدن در این رابطه فرضیه های زیادی وجود دارن، نه فقط در مورد هزارها بلکه در مورد سایر اقوام هم هست، در مورد پشتون هم هست، در مورد تاجیک هم هست، در مورد ازبک. اینا به هر حال متاسفانه پاری از نجات پرستای افسانه را دامن زدن، ترویج کردن که هزارها خیلی متأخر هستن.
The early inhabitants of these regions were Buddhists, but when Ali, the Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, arrived here with his companions, some Hazara tribes converted to Shia Islam during their stay and over a long period of time after him. In those days, being a Shiite simply meant declaring allegiance to Ali and his family. But over the centuries, the various Muslim communities and clans became more radicalized as they began stressing the importance of tradition and identity in order to underline the differences between Shia and Sunni Islam, which has always been the dominant force in the Islamic world. Until their land was captured by the Pashtuns in the 1880s, the Hazara placed women on an equal footing with men. The social position of women was such that they were consulted on family decisions and might even ride to war with the men. This, of course, is not at all what one encounters in rural Afghan society today. Over the centuries, successive invasions forced the Hazara to retreat deeper into the mountainous regions of the Hazarajat. In these inhospitable lands, they managed just about to scrape a living. They cultivated the land and made utensils in wood and metal. They became expert ironmongers and manufactured swords and shields, but they also produced spades for working the land. They remained independent of non-Hazara ethnic control until 1892. But the Afghan ruler Abdul Rahman put an end to all of that. Abdul Rahman came to power in 1880 as the Emir of Kabul. Initially, his pressure against the Hazara was political and financial, but in the face of their resistance, he resorted to oppression and violence, and this led to uprisings by the local populations. Abdul Rahman defeated the Hazara tribes one by one. He occupied the entire Hazarajat and incorporated it into the Afghan state in 1893. He replaced local leaders with Pashtun administrators who set up a system of exorbitant taxes. His troops assaulted Hazara women, organized the pillaging of homes, the enslavement of children. By sending Sunni clerics to every village in Hazarajat, Abdul Rahman forced the Shiite Hazara to attend Sunni mosques and to abandon Shiism. Hazara resistance to Abdul Rahman's integration was ruthlessly crushed, and an edict was issued granting rights over the fertile pasture lands in the region to Pashtun nomad tribes, the Kochis, who had helped the Emir to conquer the area. For 90 years the Kochis exercised these rights. When they themselves became landlords, they built the mud fortresses, now in ruins, that still dot the Hazarajat countryside. Meanwhile, Abdul Rahman partitioned their lands into 3 provinces to destroy the Hazara's sense of unity and independence. He described the Shiites as infidels. This is a translation of a letter he addressed to Sunni clerics and preachers in 1892.
Let it be known to all respectable mullahs and preachers authorized to say prayers in mosques that the infidels, namely the Shiites, are also living in Afghanistan. At the instigation of those devils, their imams, they thought it fit to abuse the caliphs. If their infidelity is due to their ignorance, they ought to grasp the true facts of a true religion. But if they persist in their false faith, they should all be put to death and their property confiscated in accordance with the divine doctrine and the precepts of the Prophet.
This was the beginning of a century of bloody persecution.
ساختارهای زندگی را از بین بردن.